Hi, my name's Eric. I'll be reading you selections from the e-edition of today's Fall Rivers, the Herald News. Today's date is Monday, September 16th of 2024. We'll start with the weather. Across the south coast today, mostly sunny and nice. A gorgeous day to get outside, feel the sun on your face. High of 81, expected low of 54. Tomorrow, Tuesday, again, mostly sunny, nice on the south coast. High of 83, low of 58. Wednesday and Thursday look to have showers throughout the day. Mostly during the afternoon, high of 83, low of 61. On Wednesday, high of 76, low of 58. On Thursday, both days fairly humid and again wet. Friday, breezy with some sun around, mostly cloudy, but rain not necessarily expected. It will still be a little humid, high of 77, low of 53. Heading back to the front of the paper, the Night Owl Diner seeks city funding, wants help to fix its historic neon sign, by Dan Medeiros in Fall River. The owners of the historic Night Owl Diner are looking to brighten up the Flint neighborhood again. The city's Community Preservation Committee on Monday will be asking to spend $125,000 restoring the iconic owl neon sign back to its original, more menacing appearance. It's unclear what exactly menacing means in that context, but the diner's neon signage and owl figure, sitting silently atop the long-closed restaurant keeping watch over the neighborhood, have been neglected and broken for years. If approved, the Community Preservation Act money would also help to repair or install mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems. The funding would also provide design services, reconstruct a handicapped accessible bathroom, and restore windows and the diner's aluminum skin. The board meets Monday, September 16th at 6 p.m. In March this year, Joseph Nasrallah, owner of the tiny 1956 restaurant, indicated his desire to sell the property at 1680 Pleasant Street, which includes the diner and the lot behind it. Architect Anton Diaz went before the Historical Commission on Nasrallah's behalf to ask the board to place the diner on the city's Register of Significant Structures. It did so, which protects the diner from demolition for 6 months should a new owner decide to tear it down. At the time, Diaz also said he was working on having the diner added to the Massachusetts Historical Commission and the National Register of Historic Places. Those designations would give the Night Owl stronger historic protections and make it eligible for CPA funding and tax credits for restoration. What is the CPA? How is it funded? The Community Preservation Committee distributes funding from the Community Preservation Act, which dedicates a portion of real estate taxes to a fund that supports affordable housing, open space or recreation, and preserving historically significant properties. In Fall River, a 1.5% property tax surcharge fills the fund. For the average property owner in the city, it costs about $50 a year. Anyone can apply for funding if they meet the eligibility criteria, and the city's 9-member board decides how to spend that money locally. What's the Night Owl's history, and what's its future? The Night Owl was built in 1956 by D. Raphael Manufacturing Company of New Rochelle, New York. That's the same company that built Al Mack's Diner across town. Once a fixture of the Flint and famous for its hot cheese sandwiches, the tiny stainless steel and red enamel striped diner has long been dormant, shuttered for well over a decade. There once also was a second Night Owl location at 2nd and Morgan Streets, but only this one has survived. Nasrallah owns the diner in a wedge-shaped piece of property between Pleasant Street and Eastern Avenue, which is home to a Hertz rental car business and the Homemade Donuts coffee shop, which lease their spaces. In March, Diaz said Nasrallah wanted to restore the Night Owl to working order and Department of the Interior standards. Its future after that would be up for grabs, but the primary goal was to save it. They prefer to sell it first and have the new buyers decide what to do with it, Diaz said. If they can't find a seller, they're looking for a lessee. Moving into the regional and essentially national news now. There's only one story that's local in the Herald News today that isn't a sports story. U.S. Senators slam Steward CEO and threaten contempt proceedings by Henry Schwann of the Worcester Telegram and Gazette. Lack of spending, not enough staff, and harm to patients, all caused by the greed and neglect of bankrupt Steward Healthcare. Those were the messages repeatedly delivered during a hearing Thursday morning held by the U.S. Senate committees on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. Members heard testimony from witnesses, including two from Massachusetts, who excoriated Steward and the for-profit company's CEO, Dr. Ralph De La Torre, who didn't attend in defiance of a subpoena. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, the committee chairman, called De La Torre the poster child for the outrageous type of corporate greed permeating the for-profit healthcare system. Through his attorney, De La Torre said his attendance wasn't possible while bankruptcy proceedings continue. Sanders blasted the CEO, saying De La Torre raided Steward funds for his personal use, amassing expensive assets, including a $40 million yacht and a $15 million custom-made fishing boat while Steward's patients were dying. Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy, the committee's ranking Republican, said he and Sanders are investigating possible civil enforcement and criminal contempt proceedings against De La Torre for his failure to comply with a committee subpoena to testify at the hearing. In Massachusetts, 8 Steward hospitals faced possible closure before approval of sales agreements last week for 6 of the hospitals: St. Elizabeth's Medical Center in Boston, Good Samaritan Medical Center in Brockton, Holy Family Hospital in Haverhill and Methuen, Morton Hospital in Taunton, and St. Anne's Hospital in Fall River by a federal bankruptcy judge. The new owners are nonprofit hospital groups. The agreements require state and federal regulatory approvals by the end of this month, and Massachusetts plans to spend $700 million over the next 3 years to prop up those hospitals until they're on firm financial footing. 2 Steward hospitals in Massachusetts didn't make the cut: Neshoba Valley Medical Center in Ayer and Kearney Hospital in Boston shut down last month. Steward said there was no choice but to close them because they received no qualified buyers, leaving 1,200 employees out of work and thousands of patients, many of them low income and on government insurance, scrambling to find care. Audra Sprague, a Neshoba nurse for 17 years, told the committee about the hospital struggling to care for patients while Steward refused to pay for necessary supplies. Sprague said she brought her son to the Neshoba emergency room because he faced a life-threatening situation tied to type 1 diabetes, but there wasn't enough staff to treat him. To ensure my son received the critical time-sensitive care he needed, I had to act as his nurse that night instead of his mother, said Sprague. Steward only cares about money and not what happens to patients. Nurse Ellen McInnes choked up several times when she talked about the struggles of taking care of patients at understaffed and underfunded St. Elizabeth's Medical Center in Boston, one of the Steward hospitals that sold last week. McInnes said Steward didn't pay for bereavement boxes for newborns who had died, so nurses had to put the remains into cardboard shipping boxes before taking them to the morgue. Preventable deaths resulted from Steward's mismanagement, claimed McInnes. The corporatization and commoditization of healthcare led to horrifying suffering and harm to our patients, she said. In addition to hearing testimony, the committee wondered if more federal oversight is needed to corral for-profit companies that venture into the healthcare industry. Republican Senator Mitt Romney of Utah, the former governor of Massachusetts, noted that Steward's understaffing and their refusal to pay vendors plagued hospitals in his state. He wondered if federal and state governments are doing enough to stop companies like Steward from eating away at jobs and safe patient care. Should federal regulators be more aggressive? He asked during the hearing. What should states do or not do to prevent this from happening? McInnes supports stronger government oversight. She told the committee she repeatedly approached Massachusetts lawmakers and the State Department of Public Health about Steward's failures, but nothing happened. Then she gave the committee an example of inaction, telling members about the temporary closure of Neshoba Valley Medical Center's intensive care unit during COVID-19's pandemic. The Massachusetts Nurse Association reported the action to the state health department, and Steward told the state that the ICU was open. Pictures were sent to the state health department to show the ICU was in fact closed, but McInnes said the state sided with Steward's account that it was open, and nothing was done. The DPH is a toothless tiger. This needs to be solved at the federal level. Senator Mike Brown, a Republican from Indiana, said during the hearing that he and Sanders are working on a bill to improve the transparency of entities that own hospital systems. We have to fix this from the ground up or we're going to hear more tragic stories, said Brown. Sanders closed the hearing with a pledge to pursue more control over for-profit companies that he believes are damaging the nation's healthcare system and ruining lives. Then he had a parting shot for De La Torre. If Dr. De La Torre thinks he's comfortable for not being here, if you're watching, you're wrong. We will be pursuing this. And the Herald News asks the question, could running mates sway the election? Voters paying particular attention this year. This is written by Sam Woodward and Haley B. Miller of the USA Today Network. We are out of local news. Rhonda Woods is a 71-year-old retired nurse who's voted across party lines her entire life. She cast ballots for Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush twice, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. This year, she said, voting for Trump's not an option. Something she felt even more sure about when the Republican presidential nominee tapped U.S. Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio as his running mate. I think it's important that we get somebody in office that can take over, said Woods, who lives in the battleground state of Michigan. It's kind of stupid to think that a vice president isn't important, right? Vice presidential candidates have often been seen as understudies, silver medalists, or the forgotten middle child. This year could be different. Voters like Woods say they're indeed paying close attention to Vance and his Democratic rival, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, during this truncated general election cycle as the candidates barnstorm swing states. It's a spotlight that's likely to intensify as their October 1st debate approaches in New York City. Recent polling from USA Today and Suffolk University found that Walz has higher favorability than Vance. And while Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris will be atop the nation's presidential ballots and therefore top of mind for voters, observers say their running mates could help tip the scales in an election that may come down to the narrowest of margins. Interest in this year's vice presidential candidates has been high for much of the campaign cycle. The COVID-19 pandemic, the ages of both Biden, who was 81, and Trump, 78, and the assassination attempt against the former Republican president serve as stark reminders that every chief executive needs a capable number two just in case. I think they matter, but on the margins, said University of Dayton professor Christopher Devine, who's studied the impact of vice presidential candidates. If this is an election decided on the margins, we could look back and say that was consequential. Resumes and gaffes make headlines. For both VP candidates, the attention hasn't slowed down since they secured their party's nominations this summer. Reporting by the Associated Press and New York Times highlighted Vance's connections to the people behind the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, a policy blueprint for a future Republican administration from which both the senator and Trump have sought to distance themselves. Harris's campaign resurfaced Vance's past remarks about women and families, including his criticism of childless cat ladies and suggestions that women who focus on their careers are on a path to misery. Democrats have accused Vance of fixating on childlessness. It's part of what first inspired Walz to brand Vance as weird before Harris had even picked the governor as her running mate. Vance's debut also invoked comparisons to Sarah Palin, the little-known former Alaska GOP governor who some believe cost John McCain the presidency in 2008 for her tendency to invite scandal and go rogue once she'd made the national spotlight as his running mate. Walz, meanwhile, has received renewed scrutiny for his resume as governor and congressman. GOP leaders have attacked Walz's progressive policy actions as governor, such as making menstrual products available in boys' and girls' school bathrooms and protecting reproductive rights. Vance went after Walz's military record and accused the governor of stolen valor, which angered some veterans and Republicans. Waltz's response to the violence following the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, as well as his administration's oversight of the nation's largest pandemic fraud scheme, has painted a complicated picture of his actions during his tenure as governor and whether he's fit to serve as number two. Waltz and his administration's responses to his actions during the civil unrest in 2020 have remained vague. A public records nonprofit recently sued the Minnesota Department of Public Safety for information and transcripts of interviews that were done with Waltz's staff and possibly the governor himself to learn more about how the administration handled the violence that resulted in an estimated $2 billion in damage. The nonprofit requested a jury trial, and it's waiting for an answer from the state. So what do voters think? Will the good, bad, and ugly publicity be enough to sway voters? Trump, in one recent interview, said he doesn't seem to think so. Historically, the choice of a vice president makes no difference, Trump said during the National Association of Black Journalists conference in July. Washington State resident and lawyer Eric Thacker, who's 35 years old, disagrees. He believes vice presidential picks matter, and they were part of why he voted for Biden in 2020. Thacker saw Harris as a more progressive version of Biden, whom he described as an establishment Democrat to USA Today. I was like, I'm on board with this, picking her as a running mate. That made me more likely to vote for him, he said. Thacker, a self-described independent, voted for Obama in 2008, then Mitt Romney in 2012, wrote in a third-party candidate in 2016, and cast a ballot for Biden in 2020. He said he'll vote for Harris this year. Choosing Waltz as her running mate wasn't necessarily the deciding factor, but a solidification that Thacker's making the right choice for himself. I like a fair amount of Waltz's policies from Minnesota, he said. I thought his picking was a little bit of a signal that Harris might be breaking from the more centrist administration of Joe Biden. Republican Roxanne Hoban is also heartened by her party's running mate. The 55-year-old Pennsylvania resident was all in on Trump from the beginning, and she initially hoped the former president would choose Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina as his number two. But the more she learns about Vance, the more she likes. I like that he was in the Marines, Hoban said. He has that disciplined mindset about him. I think he has family, God, and country foremost in his mind, so that's a big plus. And he's very personable. I could listen to him for hours. He doesn't get on my nerves, if you know what I mean. While Trump's choice ultimately didn't affect her decision for November, Hoban said the assassination attempt against him in July underscored the need for him to choose the right running mate. If he would have had his head turned slightly more, he would have been gone, she said. You're going to need somebody who's going to step right into his shoes. And it's worth noting, this is your reader, that the FBI reported another assassination attempt on Trump yesterday at a golf course, with someone poking an AR-15 with a scope through the bushes. We believe no shots were fired by the person in the bushes, but the Secret Service opened fire on him. So that would be 2 assassination attempts in basically 2 months for Donald Trump. And the person who is number 2, and as they always say, a heartbeat away from the presidency, is extremely important because of age and or terrible things like assassinations. In international news, Houthi missiles reach central Israel for the first time. This is from Reuters in Jerusalem. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel would inflict a heavy price on the Iran-aligned Houthis who control northern Yemen after they reached central Israel with a missile on Sunday for the first time. Houthi military spokesman Yahya Sarria said that the group struck with a new hypersonic ballistic missile that traveled 1,270 miles in just 11 and a half minutes. After initially saying the missile had fallen in an open area, Israel's military later said it had probably fragmented in the air and that pieces of interceptors had landed in fields and near a railway station. Nobody was reported hurt. Air raid sirens had sounded in Tel Aviv and across central Israel moments before the impact at around 6:35 a.m. local time, sending residents running for shelter, and loud booms were heard. Reuters saw smoke billowing in an open field in central Israel. At a weekly cabinet meeting, Netanyahu said the Houthis should have known that Israel would exact a heavy price for attacks on Israel. Quote, whoever needs a reminder of that is invited to visit the Hodeidah port, Netanyahu said, referring to an Israeli retaliatory airstrike against Yemen in July for a Houthi drone that hit Tel Aviv. The Houthis have fired missiles and drones at Israel repeatedly in what they say is solidarity with the Palestinians since the war in the Gaza Strip began with a Hamas attack on Israel in October. The drone that hit Tel Aviv for the first time in July killed a man and wounded 4 people. Israeli airstrikes in response on Houthi military targets near the port of Hodeidah killed 6 and wounded 80. Previously, Houthi missiles have not penetrated deep into Israeli airspace, with the only one reported to have hit Israeli territory, falling in an open area near the Red Sea port of Eilat in March. Israel should expect more strikes in the future as we approach the first anniversary of the October 7th operation, including responding to its aggression on the city of Hodeidah, Saraya said. The deputy head of the Houthis' media office, Nasruddin Amir, said Sunday in a post on X the missile had reached Israel after 20 missiles failed to intercept it, describing it as just the beginning. The Israeli military also said that 40 projectiles were fired toward Israel from Lebanon on Sunday, and all were either intercepted or landed in open areas, and no injuries were reported, the military said. The military is investigating unauthorized leaflets ordering evacuation in Lebanon. The Israeli military said Sunday it was investigating after a unit dropped unauthorized leaflets on a border area in southern Lebanon ordering residents to leave. Lebanon's state-run national news agency reported that Israel had dropped leaflets ordering residents out of the Wazani area. The Israeli military said dropping the leaflets was an unauthorized action by a unit that had not sought appropriate approval and that there was no evacuation underway. Tens of thousands of civilians have already fled villages and towns on both sides of the Israel-Lebanon frontier during months of cross-border strikes, since Lebanon's armed Hezbollah movement stepped up attacks alongside the war in Gaza. More national news. Florida High Court to review abortion amendment case. Justices will examine whether DeSantis or others interfered with the ballot, by Jim Rosica. The Florida Supreme Court on Wednesday agreed to fast-track a case against Governor Ron DeSantis and other state officials for what's been called unlawfully using their offices and agencies to interfere with the election for the abortion access amendment on the November statewide ballot. The proceedings in the above-styled case are hereby expedited, the court's order said. DeSantis, Attorney General Ashley Moody, and Agency for Healthcare Administration Secretary Jason Wida have until September 23rd to respond, and Palm Beach County-based attorney Adam Richardson, who filed the case, has until September 30th to reply. Richardson, a frequent critic of the DeSantis administration, on Tuesday filed what's called a petition for writs of quo warranto, writs of mandamus, and all writs relief. The idea is for the court to order state officials to show what authority they have for performing some action. Since the court approved ballot placement, they have waged a campaign to interfere with the election, Richardson wrote, asking the justices to immediately exercise their authority before the November 5th general election. Challenges such as his aren't won often, but one University of Florida Law Review article said they often serve as the sole method for testing the political power of a state official, calling them a powerful and effective way for citizens to constrain the state government to the limits of power established by the state constitution. The ballot measure for Amendment 4 would enshrine abortion access in the Florida Constitution if it gets no less than 60% support from voters statewide. The state now has a 6-week abortion ban, though there are medical, rape, and incest exceptions for patients up to 15 weeks of pregnancy. As previously reported by the USA Today network, Florida Richardson pointed to examples that include a new web page published by AHCA that criticizes the amendment, accusing it of threatening women's safety, and the agency paid for a television advertisement that directs Floridians to that web page. Also mentioned in Richardson's filing is how, as first reported by the USA Today network, Florida, the governor's Faith and Community Initiative reached out to religious groups to advertise a call with State Attorney General Ashley Moody titled Your Legal Rights and Amendment 4's Ramifications. Moreover, state election officials sent police to the homes of some residents who signed a petition to put the measure on the ballot to make sure their signatures were legitimate. The Florida Department of State has defended that, saying it uncovered evidence of illegal conduct with fraudulent petitions. DeSantis has defended his use of his office to oppose the amendment, and has begun turning to churches and religious groups to build his case against it. AHCA resources were being used to basically provide people with accurate information, and I think that's something that's really important, the governor has said. During a Wednesday morning press conference, the American Civil Liberties Union of Florida announced it too would be filing a lawsuit against the AHCA on behalf of the Amendment 4 campaign. This website is filled with demonstrably false statements, and so we're challenging the misuse of taxpayer dollars to lie to voters about this amendment, said Keisha Mulfort, the ACLU of Florida's senior communications strategist. And contributing to that report was Florida First Amendment issues reporter Douglas Soul. There is one obituary in today's Herald News. It's of Mary Quintal of Fall River, who at the age of 95 passed on September 5th. Mary was interred with her sister Catherine Quintal at St. Patrick's Cemetery in Fall River. Mary so loved Jesus, she attended several church events, tent healing services, and faithfully spread the word to bring people to salvation. Though she did attend holidays with her family, she also served at many food kitchens and visited friends who otherwise never had company. A celebration of Mary's life will take place Wednesday, September 18th. That's this coming Wednesday, day after tomorrow, at the VFW Post 5392, 134 Shove Street, or Shove Street, Shove, in Tiverton. Service is at 11 a.m. The next headline reads, FDA says mammograms must provide new info. Insurance companies may not cover more tests, by Adriana Rodriguez. Women getting their routine mammograms may find new information on their results about breast density. A ruling from the FDA requires mammogram facilities to inform patients about breast density. That's a measurement of tissue in a woman's breasts, and that went into effect on Tuesday. It's a great first step for patients to understand their risk of breast cancer and whether they might need additional testing, health experts say, as it's harder for mammograms to detect cancers in dense breasts. The national requirement also helps standardize mammogram reports across the country, which eliminates a patchwork of different mandates from each state. But experts also say it doesn't go far enough, as it doesn't guarantee insurance companies will cover the additional testing with an ultrasound or MRI for women with dense breasts, even if healthcare providers recommend one. Without insurance coverage, patients may delay the extra testing necessary to find or rule out breast cancer. And in a type of cancer where early detection is the key to survival, health experts say this delay can make a dramatic difference in treatment, cost, quality of life, and even survival. And with that, we've come to the end of our reading of Fall River's Herald News, dated today, Monday, September 16th of 2024. This is your reader, Eric, saying be well, be safe, look after each other. Remember our veterans, especially those we've lost recently. Bye for now.